Hey there, I'm Rachel Kugel, and this is Rachel Defends You. And I am so lucky today. We are so lucky today to get to have as our guest Lisa Van Slyke. She is the host of Rabbit Hole Reflections, which is an amazing podcast featuring raw stories of hope and of healing. And like I saw the other day, sometimes the fire it takes to rise up. I actually saw a clip of you eating fire, I think. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that at some point.
Okay,
It's incredible. But
sure.
she practices what she preaches. And the cool thing about Lisa is that our interests are really aligned because I am, as a criminal defense attorney, I'm all about, making sure that people are more than their worst day, and that they can rise up from their bad decisions or the bad decisions of others who they may have hitched their wagon to at some point. And I know that Lisa shares similar values. She is a veteran, and I thank her for her service. And she
Thank you.
is a speaker on women's empowerment issues. I'm so excited to hear from her today. I hope we get to hear about women's empowerment in general, but also specifically the reason I wanted to have her on this podcast with me was because she has a personal experience with veterans and the criminal justice system and DWIs. So I'm hoping to get that story out of her as well. So Lisa, thank you so, so, so much for sharing your time with us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
What was the deal with the fire eating? I saw it on your social and I was like, first of all, that's crazy. And also maybe I should be doing that.
So I was at a speaker workshop. I am a speaker by trade, and I always try to find time to hone my craft. I was at a speaker workshop, and one of the guest speakers, that's his thing. He teaches
Mm.
people how to eat fire. And I was selected from everyone in the audience to go
Oh
up
my,
on that stage and eat fire. And it was so empowering. It really fit with what I do to help women find their voice,
mm.
spark that inner pilot light again, to find that passion and just, drive forward in the best, most empowered way possible. So it just aligned. It was so
What
awesome.
does it feel like? I mean, does it taste like anything? What does it feel and taste
I
like?
tasted the lighter fluid is
Mm.
really what I tasted. I think I was in such a trance that I didn't realize what the fire
Adrenaline.
was like in my mouth. But, fire needs oxygen. There wasn't a lot of oxygen in that space. You hold your breath, you make sure you don't breathe in or you're going to inhale it, and it's just this huge disaster. He really worked me up to be empowered enough to make the choice to actually eat the fire. So it was so surreal. And I look back at the video and I was like, did I really do that? And I did. I really did that. So it was the whole entire moment, shaking from nerves and excitement and adrenaline. I was just like, let's do this. I'm going to eat this fire. So it was so empowering. I suggest if you can find somebody to teach you, go and have it done.
Maybe I will. I've always wanted to do like, the Tony Robbins thing where you walk on the hot
Yes.
coals at the end. So it's like a similar thing. Maybe someday we'll meet up somewhere and do that, host something where people can do that.
Sounds fun. Let's do it.
Can you speak a bit to, where your work has taken you now? I mean, I want to get into the story of, of the Veterans Court and your relationship. And I know a little bit about it already, and I want to share that with everyone. But also I want to know more about like what you're up to and what your work is kind of becoming in time.
I am the host of Rabbit Hole Reflections. We have dropped the with Lisa, but we keep that there just because I am the host. I firmly believe that people have a story to tell. And when
Mm,
we still tell our stories, we not only heal ourselves a little bit more, but we can heal others. And the importance of telling your story is to not stay stuck in that situation, that in your rabbit hole, that was that dark time that was really hard to climb out of. It's to help empower others. And when you can say things out loud and own your own truth, you can
mm,
heal a lot more. And that's why I do the rabbit hole reflections with Lisa. It's my passion. I
mm.
love speaking to people. I love hearing their stories. I am a storyteller, but more importantly, I'm a curator of stories. I like to collect those
Love
stories
that.
and make sure that people, the spoken word is so important to the human species. It's really what sets us apart from other, animals in the animal kingdom. So for me, it's preserving that and making sure that future generations and in 1,000 years that they can look back and understand
Mm.
our perspective and the things that we were going through.
And really to that end, it's like some people, I mean, I deal with this sometimes with my clients too, like some people they take a story, a lived experience, and it becomes who they are. And I
Yes.
don't mean that in a positive way. I mean, it
Right, yeah,
becomes
exactly.
they become victimized by it, or stuck in it, like you said, the rabbit hole, stuck down the rabbit hole of either a bad decision they made or a trauma maybe someone else did to them. They either get into victimhood about it, or and I think what you're really kind of trying to do is transform that, like turn that concept on its head and be like,
Yes.
yeah, you are your story to some extent, but let's like move it, like almost to push the energy outward, like move it outward instead of turning it right so inward, like
Exactly.
move it
Yeah.
outward and
You
say,
don't have to live there. You don't have to live in it. You can unpack it
mm,
and leave it at the door and go on. It can be challenging. And so the stories that I share it's with guests, I actually have people come on and share their story to offer hope and inspiration to people. And they leave nuggets of wisdom and information that listeners can find somebody they resonate with, or something that they're like, oh, I want to go find out a little bit more about that. I think that can help me with my journey. Or, oh my gosh, I'm not alone, because
yeah.
we're
And
not
isn't that the
alone.
trick? Isn't that the trick of it too? It's like you feel the worse when you're self-involved. And when
Yes.
you can turn it outward and figure out how either something difficult you might have gone through or a bad decision you might have made, how if you can use that to help someone else, it like it fixes it, it flips it
It,
all around.
yes. Makes
And
you feel so much better. Yeah.
yeah, and it's that whole thing of like your mess is your message or whatever, the idea that there's a reason you went through it. And if one person is maybe helped from hearing about it,
Yeah.
it kind of makes it make sense. And I think that's, as humans, like that's what we're looking to do, right? Is to try to make sense of whatever the thing
Yeah.
we've been.
That's why we're here.
Yeah. And so to that end, you have an experience that, I wanted to bring you on to talk about because, you are a veteran, and I hope you'll speak to that as well. Like what was your service like?
I was in the Army. I was a medic in the Army, and I served for about 6 years. So
Wow. Well, thank you for your service. It's
thank you.
so important now more than ever. And I'm always looking to speak to people about their unique circumstances with the criminal justice system, with substance abuse, etc. And I specialize in criminal defense and DUI and telling those stories. And we have things now that are becoming more prevalent, which are things like veterans court and different opportunities
Yes.
for veterans. We're seeing people coming back with PTSD that's causing substance abuse issues and stuff. And I know you had a personal experience, not with yourself getting in trouble, but a personal experience that you've lived through with another veteran. Could you speak to that a bit?
Absolutely. So a little bit of background. I am 5 years sober.
Mm,
My sobriety
congrats.
date is February 2nd of 2020. So I started my sobriety right before the
Yeah, that
pandemic.
timing, that's when everyone
I
else started drinking.
That's what everybody else, right? I was very fortunate to have maintained my sobriety for that amount of time. And I was also, I'm going to caveat that to say, I was very fortunate that I never had personally anything happen to me
Mm,
that was where I needed to be a part of the legal system, or where I was a part of the legal system. My story is about my relationship with alcohol and my relationship with another alcoholic. And he is actually the one who
mm,
was he was arrested for a DWI
mm,
and spent a night in jail. And then from there, it was, we had children together. Well,
yeah,
we were raising our children together. We didn't share a biological child. And just the whole process of watching that. And I am in Texas. At that time was in San Antonio, Texas. So our courts might be a little bit different here.
sure,
We're very pro veteran here in Texas,
sure.
very pro veterans. So the system here might be a little bit different than the veteran system elsewhere. He was a part of the veteran system, and it was interesting to watch that whole entire punishment, I guess
Yeah.
I'll say, unravel.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I think, there's different sides to it. And I definitely want to get your take on both sides, right? So what the thought with it is, just so people that don't know or haven't been in that experience, is that, there's a movement, if you will, toward these sort of alternative resolutions for people with drugs and alcohol issues in general. And
mhm,
then with veterans, let's say in particular. And some of the courts, like here in New York, we have some veterans court options, some
okay,
that range from helping people with getting into programs or legal help, that kind of thing, all the way to full court systems that only deal with veterans, where there's almost this like touchy-feely aspect. Like usually the judge is also a veteran if they can find one. And the Pledge of Allegiance is said at the beginning of the session. There is clapping for these guys. Like this is like almost like a treatment court with a specialized understanding of veterans. And I think the reason for that is a couple things. Like one, like you said, respecting, loving, and taking care of our veterans, which is important. And two, the understanding that, sometimes people that serve come back changed.
Yes.
We owe it to those people maybe to have an understanding of that. I've seen clients with PTSD from serving overseas. Unfortunately, I've seen female clients that were not treated, that were veterans
Right.
that were maybe not treated so well amongst a lot of men, and they have like a form of PTSD as well from that experience, some sexual acting out and attention. I've seen people that choose the military, not necessarily so it's wonderful when when you choose it because you really love the country and it's totally based on that. There's also people that choose it as a last resort because things are not
Yes.
going so great. And so it attracts sometimes a certain thing as well. So that's the reason for it. That's kind of how they work. What was your experience in seeing the Veterans Court you guys saw in Texas, and what did you think was good or not good about what you saw?
And at the time, it wasn't veterans court. It
Okay.
was not a veteran judge with veteran lawyers and just everybody in the room were veterans. I do know what you're speaking of as far as that goes. That's becoming more common here. This was not a veterans court, but it was a veterans program
Mm.
that was, he was charged with the DUI or DWI. And like I said, he spent that night in jail. He got out on bond. When he went to court, his punishment was, now, this was his first offense. Let me go back to that. This was his first offense. And let me speak to something else that you had said. Veterans, whether you went to war or not, the experience is unlike any other. And when you step into the civilian world, I've been out since 2010, and I still have a very difficult time
Mm.
trying to fit into corporate structure in the civilian world. So
Mm.
it can be a very big change. It could be a very difficult undertaking for people to adapt to that. And
Mm.
then you compound that, like you said, there are a lot of women who experienced military sexual trauma. There's a lot of people who experienced war, and they have survivor's guilt. They
Mm.
watched their battle buddies die, or they're questioning why they're there in the first place. So you
Mhm.
add all of these things, and then you come home to a world that doesn't understand what you've been through, and it can lead to those substance problems. Alcohol is very common in the military.
Right, well, that's the
Uh,
other thing, the culture, right?
it
It's a
is
culture of
absolutely
manliness
right
and drinking and
culture.
then celebration or drowning sorrows, either way.
Absolutely. And you jack these people up to be these, warriors to
Mhm.
go out, and it's very testosterone driven, and you're doing everything that, a male does, go out and fight and fight and fight. And even the women get into that. And then we don't have outlets. We don't have coping mechanisms. It's you go and you train to, fight the enemy, and then you go back to your room at the end of the day after you just
Mhm.
pretended that took out an entire base camp or whatever. So the military has come a long way, but at the time there was no coping mechanisms. So what did you do? You went to the bar with your battle buddy, you went to the strip club, you drank in the barracks. A lot of people isolated and became alone, and
Mm.
alcohol became that friend. And it is the culture, it is the subculture of the military, particularly in the enlisted. And I'm not saying officers don't have that, because it is there as well. But for the enlisted, it's a little bit different of a lifestyle as far as that goes. So the man that I was with, we're no longer together. He was arrested for the, DWI, spent the night in jail, went to court, and there was a veterans program through the court system
Okay.
in the state of Texas. His
Mhm.
punishment was a breathalyzer for a
Okay,
year
in the car, an
in the
entire
car.
okay.
And he didn't have to carry it on his person. He didn't have a bracelet that
Mm.
checked his blood alcohol level. It was just in the car.
Mhm.
So starting the car, anytime he had to start the car and he was behind the wheel, he had to blow in the breathalyzer. Every once in a while, he would have to do it while he was driving down the
Yeah,
road.
the rolling tests,
But
right,
yes,
right.
exactly like that, because that's safe. Like what?
Yeah, I
But
know.
I mean, I get it. They don't want you to drink
No,
with
there's
an
been
open
studies that
container or
it
whatever,
it
So I
isn't
mean, I
safe.
understand, but it's like, let me distract myself from driving to blow in this little breathalyzer
Yeah.
thing. So that was his only punishment. And as long as he stayed clean, then he was the charge or the arrest wasn't dropped from his record. That was something he would have to go and later pay, but
Mhm.
he was no
Responsible.
longer charged for it. It was an arrest, not a charge, and or like no guilt. There was nothing
Conviction, a
attached to it. Yeah.
conviction.
Thank you. Thank you. So, as long as he stayed clean, but every time we got in the car, especially with our children,
Yeah.
watching him blow into this thing, it's like, how do you talk about that with your kids?
Yeah, that's so
How do you own that? So it was a really interesting year, and it didn't stop him from drinking. It didn't stop either one of us from drinking. I continued to drink even after watching what he went through. So it's like,
Did he ever have any problems with the interlock? I mean, was it always because if you were still drinking, were you ever getting it? Because those are set generally to go off at anything over 0.02. So
so
pretty
is
low.
if he was drinking, I
Mhm.
wouldn't drink because I knew I would need to drive the car.
Okay.
If I was drinking, he wouldn't drink because he knew he needed to drive the car.
Okay.
So what it turned into was a problem where we just didn't leave the house. We were just
Mhm.
drinking out in our garage, in our little
Mhm.
man cave, our little
Mhm.
hangout spot, and have parties at the house and have people come over to
Right.
barbecues and whatnot. So we didn't have a problem. There were a couple of times, I take that back. There were a couple of times where he had to go and be like, look, this thing is broken, and they had to like send him a new one or whatever. But he did not ever drink behind the wheel after
Mhm.
that, but it didn't stop him from drinking.
So if I could sort of read between the lines here a little bit, it sounds like you're feeling you're left feeling unsatisfied by the way the system handled the veterans. It felt more like they were like putting him through something and spitting him out, maybe even as a family putting you all through something and spitting it out, as opposed to
Yeah.
actually treating the underlying issue. Because yeah, they made it so that he had this thing in the car and he couldn't kind of be dangerous in the world. But it also sounds like you guys kind of figured out how to game the system pretty quick and continue drinking, and
Exactly.
didn't really stop
Yeah.
the mindset that was going.
Yeah.
It didn't
It
help.
didn't, because there was no 12-step program. There was no, therapy that was required. There wasn't anything. It was just don't drink behind the wheel of the car and you're good. So
Mhm.
there wasn't any more accountability. And like I said, it was something that we still did and continued to do. Like I said, I just got sober in 2020.
Yeah.
So, it was something that we continued to do, and it actually destroyed our relationship. So
Mm. And it also kind of like, in a way, it's leaves the veteran sort of hanging, because if we all sort of say we accept, we're going light on him, we're doing this veterans program because we accept that being a veteran carries with it certain, specialized
yes.
dangers and issues and traumas. At the same time, we're then going, but you can, but we're going to wash our hand. We're going to just sort of put a band-aid on that gunshot wound and
Yeah.
like not really address the underlying trauma or issue. What do you think, like if you were running it, what could it have done? Like what do you think, as someone who advocates for families and veterans and women, like what could this have been? Because it's an opportunity in
That's
a
a
way.
great question.
Well,
That's
because
a
in
great
a way,
question. And
because
it's
in
a
a
very
way,
loaded question.
well, I was going to say, because in a way, the other way to look at it is to say, well, this DWI, while bad, is also an opportunity, because it's a moment that the system is connected with the individual and the family. And so if it was handled differently, it could have been a moment to have pulled everyone, this family, out of it, instead of what ultimately sounds like the family kind of dissolved in time, unfortunately.
So we owe it to our veterans to do something more for them. And then there's the other side of it but they can take accountability. We can take accountability for ourselves.
Mhm.
And, you know, there's that fine line of what's entitlement and what's not entitlement. For a situation like this, it wouldn't have cost anything to their prison system. You're an attorney. There are AA programs in prison.
Mhm.
Why not include that in a veterans court?
Mhm.
Why not give the family a little bit more, because the whole family went through it. It wasn't
Yeah.
just him. And that continuing of drinking, and our kids would see us do this. Fortunately, none of them drink. So I don't know how we're
Yeah,
so
that's
lucky that
interesting.
they didn't follow in our footsteps, but maybe they were just like, no, that's not what we want for ourselves. But there's ways other than just putting them through the Veterans Administration or the VA system, having them, the doctors and the VA healthcare, there's other ways that we can give them the support that they need. And I just didn't understand why there wasn't more, because
Mhm.
I felt like civilians might be required to do a little bit more.
So in a way, you felt like they were getting special treatment for being a veteran that didn't actually serve
Mhm.
them.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting. I wonder, so this isn't really a question about veterans, but because you brought it up, I'm curious about how, the kids seeing the interlock and stuff, because this comes up a lot in everybody's case, where they've got, because interlocks are pervasive now. Almost every case
Right.
hasn't it? That's the business to
Okay.
be. Start an interlock company, because that is the business to be in. Everybody ends up with an interlock, no matter how minor. But I'm just wondering, how did you guys deal with like talking to the kids about that? Because it's that moment where it could be used as a teaching thing if it's done right.
And you're absolutely right. And there were a couple of different conflicting ideas about how
Mm,
we should raise the children. He was a lot more conservative and old school. We'll go
mhm,
with old school about, like, you don't talk to the kids about the problems and whatnot. And I was like, we need to tell them all the things, because, like you said, this can be a teaching experience for them. Um, they had to watch him do it.
yeah.
There's no getting around
Right.
watching like what he's doing. There was no hiding it. So, I mean, they did know that he got in trouble. They didn't know that it was because he was drinking behind the wheel, but they
Mhm,
did know that he got in trouble, and it was a way for him to report to the court system that he wasn't doing what he wasn't supposed to do. Now,
mhm.
at the time, my oldest and his oldest were smart enough to understand what was
They
happening.
figured it out.
So
Yeah.
there was a couple of sidebar conversations, but with the two youngest ones, it wasn't as predominant of a conversation.
It's interesting because I think a lot of people can learn from that, because it's a question I get all the time. It's like, what am I going to tell the kids, or how
The
am I going to?
truth.
Yeah, I love that. I
Truth.
love that.
Yeah.
So simple.
Yes, it is. And it's healthy for them,
Yeah.
and it helps them grow up not thinking that they don't have to be perfect.
Right. a
And,
hundred percent. And
I,
then if they ever have a problem themselves, maybe they'll
yeah,
feel like they can come to
they can
you,
come and
because
talk to you.
they
Exactly.
know you're not
Exactly.
perfect, if they should find themselves in that situation. I wonder, I mean, again, I hope it's not overstepping, but would you speak at all to your sobriety and like what changed for you in 2020? Like what's worked? Because that's another thing I get a lot. People say,
So,
I'm a big believer in AA, but I'm
and
curious. To-
and I am too.
Yeah.
And I had a good circle of people around me who held space for me. And it was opening up conversation for me about some of the things that I had gone through and why I did some of the things that I was doing. I vividly remember. So I've been an on again, off again drinker for years.
Mhm,
The alcohol became my best friend, I want to say right around 2016.
mhm,
And I was still in San Antonio at the time. I moved to Dallas in 2019 and I stopped drinking.
hmm,
And then all of a sudden, I started drinking again. I
hmm,
know why I started drinking. Okay, I will straight up be honest with you. For me, I couldn't be who I thought that I was, or I couldn't be who I thought other people wanted me to be
mm,
without alcohol.
mm,
There was a lot of underlying sexual stuff that went along with that as well.
mhm,
So I started seeing a guy in 2019, closer to 2020, and I started drinking again because I
mm.
didn't know how to handle the relationship. I was like, I don't even know how to be somebody without alcohol. I'm still trying to
It was
figure
like a
out who I
social
am.
anxiety or
I
something like
had
that.
quit drinking for a little bit and then I started up again.
Hmm,
He was very patient. He held space for me. We had conversations. He knew I didn't want to do it.
mhm,
I remember vividly pouring a shot saying, I don't want to drink this. Why am I drinking it? At the same time, I'm drinking it. So I
wow,
knew that I was coming to that point where I just didn't want to do it anymore. And I had had enough. I said, this is not who I want to be. This is not who I am. The first 3 years were wildly intense
yeah,
because for so many years, alcohol was that source of letting me, or what I thought, letting
Yeah.
me be who I am. And all of a sudden that's no longer there. And I was like, oh my gosh. And then I started feeling all of the feelings. I was like, I don't know if I can do this. Like this, I don't know if I can stay sober.
Mhm.
What is this I am experiencing? What are these feelings? And it was just having that support system, having people who had been there before me, who have journeyed years without drinking, knowing that that resource was available to help me through it.
Wow.
That was community. It's absolutely about community. Do not go alone. There are free groups out there.
Yeah.
There's groups that will pick you up. They will
Yeah.
take you to meet. There are so many options. Don't go alone.
Well,
That's
that's
really
what I
what I
think.
would have to say.
That's what I think really, like, when I say AA works, I'm not even talking about any specific, like, tenet of it or whatever. I think it works for that reason. I think it works because it creates a
Yes.
community for you of people that are in the same boat, and I think it also, and this kind of, it's a perfect kind of place to end because it goes right back to where we started, which
Mhm.
is the other thing that AA does if you do it right and you make a community around it, is it makes your mess your message. Is it
Exactly.
instead of being this shameful thing that the whole family hid and didn't talk about, and I'm trapped in this negative story about being an alcoholic or an addict or whatever, you end up in this place of your help, it's turned outward and your story helps others, and you start owning
Yes.
it and you start not being ashamed and in fact being proud of the experience you've gone through, and it becomes who you are. And so, and I think that that's really, I mean, and kind of to bring it full circle, that's also what your work is now about,
Yes.
which is
Yes.
helping people to kind of do that, right? I mean, to kind of transition from living in that place of victimhood, being victimized by their stories, and instead using them to help people. And for
Exactly.
that, I thank you because I think you
Thank you.
used your story to help people today. Um, and I hope they will go find you and listen to Rabbit Hole Reflections. I will link all your stuff in
Oh,
the show
thank you.
notes, etc. And what do you have anything like super exciting coming up in terms of
I do. So
interviews or
it's
speaking
funny
engagements?
that you ask. One thing I love AA as well. It gives people an opportunity to get up on stage in front of
Mm,
the room and tell their story. And I am a firm believer in stories help people heal. So I actually have a workshop and
mm.
a course to help people start their own podcast. So
That's
taking
phenomenal.
my experience and helping you like get there a little bit faster because it can be overwhelming. So getting your voice out there, if a podcast is how you want to do that, connect with me and let's get you broadcasting.
I
So
love that.
yeah.
I'm gonna ask you also for the link, and I'll put that in as
Yes.
well if you wanna put the link.
Perfect.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I can't thank you enough for sharing your story, and I know it's gonna help people, so I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. I've enjoyed it.